Lesson 5 of Chapter 10, Part 2 is more on the binomial theorem. First example is to find the coefficient of the fifth term in the expansion of this. So we don't need to take the binomial a plus b to the seventh power and expand the whole thing. We just need to find the fifth term. So if we're going to find the fifth term, we're going to have a number from Pascal's triangle. That number is going to be attained by doing a 7 NCR 4. And then we're going to have to take A and raise that to an exponent, and take B and raise that to an exponent. Well, your back exponent is always the same as this number right here. And then your front exponent then has to be the number that adds together to give you, in this case, 7. Oops. So it needs to be a 3. So this is how we'll calculate the fifth term in the expansion of a plus b to the seventh. And so now we go to the calculator and we do a 7 NCR 4. That gives us the coefficient, which is 35. And then we'll have an a to the third, b to the fourth behind it. That would represent the fifth term. Another example, if we have x plus y to the ninth and we have to find the sixth term, we'll find a coefficient from Pascal's triangle. It's going to be a 9 NCR something. And we're going to have an x raised to something. We're going to have a y raised to something. Well, since we're finding the sixth term, the back exponent is going to be a 5, which means this will also be a 5. And then my front exponent would have to be a 4, because the two exponents have to add together to give you 9. Now, if we find 9 NCR 5, that gives us 126. And then we've got an x to the fourth, y to the fifth behind it. So that represents the sixth term. Here's another one. This time we're finding the third term of a minus b to the 13th. So my number from Pascal's triangle would be a 13 NCR something. We're going to have an a raised to something and a negative b raised to something. My back exponent is always 1 less than this, so that would be 2. And then my front exponent would have to be 11, which means this number would have to be a 2. And so finding a 13 NCR 2 gives us a 78. We'd have an a to the 11th and a b to the second, and that would be my solution. Now the only thing you need to be concerned with is if this exponent right here was an odd number, then my coefficient at the end would have to be a negative 78, because you can see we're taking negative b and we're squaring it in this case, and a negative times a negative gives you a positive. But if that was an odd exponent, my final coefficient would have to be a negative. Next problem gives us a binomial, 2x minus 3y raised to the 8th, and they want us to find the x to the third, y to the fifth term. So let me put 2x in parentheses. That's going to need to be raised to the third power, and a negative 3y, that's going to need to be raised to the fifth power, which means my coefficient would be an 8 NCR 5. Remember, this number and this back exponent are always the same. So let's find that coefficient 8 NCR 5. And that gives us a 56. But then we're going to have to take 2 to the third, and we're going to have to take negative 3 to the fifth, and then we'll have an x to the third and a y to the fifth behind it. So there's some additional work here to get my final coefficient. So we're going to multiply that 56 by 2 to the third. And then we're also going to multiply it by negative 3 to the fifth. And that gives us 108,864. hopefully you notice that this is going to need to be a negative because we're taking a negative 3 raised to an odd exponent. We need to have an x to the third, y to the fifth behind it, and that would represent my solution. Another similar example, we've got 2p plus 1 to the 15th power. So we're going to have a 2p, and we're going to have a 1. See, if we're finding the 11th term, this is going to be a 10, and this would be a 5. So the front would be a 15 NCR 10. So let's find that 15 NCR 10. That gives us 3003. But then we'll have to take that times 2 to the 5th, and then we'll have a p to the 5th. So take that 3003 times 2 raised to the 5th power gives us 96. 96 p to the 5th. So before I leave you, I was at prom this weekend, and I happened to notice that 0 was talking to 8. And I started to listen in on that conversation between the number 0 and the number 8. And eventually I heard 0 say something that I thought was kind of funny. He was talking to 8 about, what he was wearing. He said, "Hey, that's a nice belt."